Well, we are going to have to move on here to our next topic because our guest is waiting for us. We're going to be discussing, well, what do we discuss every week because it's just never ending? The war on Iran, which, by the way, is at day 102, which is kind of insane. And the fragile ceasefire that's been sort of holding since April is now on the verge of collapse again, though now it's not again because a lot happened over the weekend, including the fact that Israel defied Donald Trump and struck Beirut's southern suburbs. Iran responded with a missile barrage at northern Israel. Israel then bombed Iran, and then the threats continued. And then now they've both taken a step back again. This is, of course, happening while U.S Iran U.S Iran negotiations are still technically ongoing. But this is definitely a new chapter in this escalating war. It's the first time Iran has really stepped in to bomb Israel on behalf of one of its allies. So to help make sense of where this is all headed, we're joined by Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute the Quincy Institute, and one of the foremost experts on U.S. Iran relations. Please forgive me, everything today is, for some reason, hard to say. I also want to mention about Trita that you can follow his excellent analysis at tritaparsi.substack.com. Trita, welcome to Breakthrough Live.
Thank you so much, Rania. And based on that introduction, it sounds like you're really tired of talking about U.S. Iran relations and diplomacy. Trust me, I'm right there with you. I am so tired of talking about it as well. So if you want to talk about anything else, I'm game for it.
We can ask you about the Knicks.
Let's go, the Knicks. Yeah, we can ask you about the Knicks. But no, it's just, yes, of course, I think we've all reached that point where we're just like, it's the same thing over and over again, but in different ways. But actually, this was a new significant shift that took place this week. You know, Israel did, as I mentioned, defy Trump and bomb Beirut. And then Iran, of course, responded by striking Israel directly for the first time since the April ceasefire. So now Iran is basically signaling that even Israeli attacks in Lebanon could be a red line to the point where they would actually intervene militarily. That is new. That's a first. So I'm curious if you could explain, why is that distinction so significant, and does it represent a genuine, durable shift in the regional balance of power?
Yes, this is very significant. Whether it signals that shift or not remains to be seen. But what the Iranians are trying to do is, after having restored their own deterrence, they're now trying to extend that deterrence towards Lebanon. And for the first time, as you mentioned, an attack on a third country has prompted a strong Iranian missile response against Israel. The reason why that is something that concerns the Israelis so much, Netanyahu calls it a new equation, and I think he's correct. Because in that new equation, if it gets established, it means that Israel's power in the region is starting to be checked. Meaning, it will no longer have complete impunity in its maneuverability in Lebanon, in Syria, and other places. Now, of course, at this point, it doesn't even seem to be fully clear whether this is all of Lebanon or whether it is at least starting off with Beirut. This is significant because we have to be honest. For the last 2 decades or so, Israel has essentially enjoyed complete maneuverability and impunity in the region. It can bomb almost anywhere it wants. The only reason why there was some pushback is once it actually struck Doha. But the very idea that it could even think of striking Doha is an indication of how far Israel has moved forward its positions when it comes to this. And, you know, we always take a look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and despite all of the ICJ rulings and all of the resolutions and all of the political commitments, reality is that there's never been any military force to back up all of the demands for Israel to stop committing war crimes, stop annexing territory, or stop committing a genocide. For the first time, there now seems to be a willingness and a capacity by a state in the region, incidentally, it's not coming from the West, in the region, to actually put some hard power behind the warnings, threats, however you want to describe it, when it comes to Israel's aggression against other states. This is not an attack that happened in order to get Israel to completely cease to exist, but rather because it was bombing Beirut relentlessly. And this is an equation, of course, that the Israelis are adamant about making sure it does not take hold. They want to have that complete maneuverability. Israel believes that its only way to be secure is for everyone else not to be secure. So the question is, did the Iranians establish this new equation? Well, the Iranians attacked. The US said that they didn't want to see the Israelis respond. The Israelis nevertheless responded, but it does seem like their response was far less than what it could have been. Both the Iranians and the Americans are hinting at that. Now, both of them may have a self serving reason to hint at that. The Iranians then struck Israel again after the Israelis had struck Iran, and the Israelis did not respond, which is part of the reason I think the White House feels that they actually did manage to restrain the Israelis, not completely. Now, the Israelis have continued to strike other cities in Lebanon and in southern Lebanon. But I think we have to be very clear. Even if this equation is established, it does not mean that the Israelis will stop. It means that every time the Israelis are thinking about striking Lebanon, they will have to now think twice, and they will have to take into account, are they willing to absorb the cost that it likely will come with? Because now the Iranians may strike them every time they do something like this. That is a reality that did not exist before. Now, of course, the Israelis are likely going to do as much as possible in order to show that that Iranian strike ended up just being an exception, not a new rule. And it's too early to tell whether it is a rule or whether it is an exception.
Well, interesting you pointed out there is that the U.S. is once again making this claim that it was able to restrain Israel and reel it in. And notably, the White House claimed that it did not provide missile defense for Israel in this latest exchange, which again would be a first, if I'm not mistaken. But yet this is a common framing from the United States with regards to Israel's attacks, whether it's Biden saying he yelled at Netanyahu and was very angry at him, but then, with regards to Gaza, and then clearly green lighting everything. So does Trump really want to rein in Netanyahu, or is this a way for him to kind of wash his hands of Israel bombing Iran while it's still happening?
I don't think there's a lot of benefit to Trump. I mean, there's this theory out there that all of this was coordinated between the U.S. and Israel. I have a hard time being convinced by that argument because, I mean, what the Iranians didn't expect Israel to strike, it was different back in June, in which the Iranians truly did not expect to be bombed. And as a result, what the U.S. did with Israel was deceptive and effective in being deceptive. At this point, it was utterly clear to the Iranians. They knew very well that Israel would strike them the minute the Iranians would strike Israel. So I don't see a lot of reason. In fact, I think there's a lot of criticism that Trump's strong warnings and demands were not heeded. And as a result, Trump lost credibility. How is that to his benefit? So I do think that actually the Israelis were directly challenging Trump in this situation. And we're seeing clear evidence that Trump has significant difficulties and challenges when it comes to restraining the Israelis. I do think, however, there was a degree of restraint likely imposed. And I'll mention one thing. You mentioned that the U.S. said that they didn't participate in the defense of Israel. Now, there's U.S. officials that say that they were. I don't know if it's true that they were or they were not, but I would suspect that the degree to which the U.S. intervened on their behalf and shot down missiles was probably less than what we saw before. This is not a binary in which you either support or you don't support. There are nuances and gradations here in between. During the war, the United States expended more interceptors shooting down missiles that were heading towards Israel than Israel expended interceptors. So the US did more to defend Israel than Israel did itself to defend itself. If you now suddenly have a scenario in which the US either didn't at all or did it to a lesser degree, that is more than just an angry phone call. Because I absolutely agree with you. These angry phone calls are even more tiresome than listening to me talk about US-Iran relations at this point. But if there actually was a material withdrawal of some degree of support, probably not enough, that is a different development. And I think from the Trump administration standpoint and from the Iranian standpoint, the Iranians want to see the US prove that it can really restrain Israel. And I think that's a fully understandable demand from the Iranian side. They want to see that the US actually can do it and is willing to do it, because otherwise, what's the point of a deal? From the Trump administration side, they are not willing to do it until they have a deal. Because if you actually do fully restrain Israel, which means that you actually have to withdraw a lot of military support, you're going to pay a massive political cost. And they don't want to pay that political cost unless they know that there is a deal. The same situation, but somewhat differently, actually existed during the Obama years as well, in which the Obama administration did not want to go fully out against the Israelis and AIPAC back then until they knew that there actually was a deal that they had in hand that they could be defending, rather than taking that fight, expend the political capital, and then find out that, oh, we actually don't even have a deal. So now we don't have a deal and we have a fight with the Israelis that was unnecessary. So in between that, again, it's not binary. I think the two sides are trying to see, okay, was there a gradation in between that was acceptable to both?
That's super interesting. Like the idea that none of these conditions will actually be met until there's actually a deal in terms of like restraining the Israelis on something like Lebanon, or in terms of even like releasing Iran's assets, right? That is a part of the negotiations as well. And that kind of brings me to my next question for you, is that these U.S. Iran talks are still technically alive. And one of the sticking points, in addition to Lebanon remaining a pretty central part of this, which, by the way, I think has surprised a lot of people, because in the past that seemed like the ceasefire on Lebanon was just kind of on the list of conditions, but would eventually like sort of be compromised on. But the Iranians are still demanding it, and they demonstrated that this week. But also, you know, the issue of releasing these $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets is obviously a major sticking point. And so Iran does seem to be using these strikes to also pressure Trump to move on that, maybe. Is that, do you think, a smart gamble, or does it risk giving him a reason to walk away entirely?
Sorry, if I understood correctly, you mean so that their demand for the release of the assets is a smart
And like
strategy,
trying
or that
to,
it will cost them something on Lebanon? No, I think some of the reason why some of these issues have become real sticking points is because there are real red lines. I think the Iranians are very serious about making sure that they get some of their asset unfrozen in the early parts of the MOU. And from the Trump administration's standpoint, the optics of that is too Obama-esque, and as a result, they want to avoid it. Just to have a little bit of a background on that, the U.S. has frozen somewhere between 120 to 150 billion dollars of Iranian money as a result of sanctions. This money is Iran's money, and it's sitting in a bunch of foreign banks, not in the U.S. at all. I don't think a single dime is in the U.S., frankly. And the Iranians want roughly 10% of that unfrozen at the outset, 12 billion. Might be even less than 10%. And 6 billion of that, incidentally, was already promised by Biden to be released back in 2022, when there was this unwritten agreement between the US and Iran and a prisoner exchange. But then after that prisoner exchange, you had these protests in Iran around Mahsa Amini. And then the Biden administration completely reneged on their deal, and they never released the assets. So from the Iranian standpoint, it's actually asking for 6 billion, in addition to the 6 billion that was supposed to be released before. But again, I think this is an issue of optics. I think the Trump administration is very worried that it will look too similar to the Obama deal, that they will get attacked using the same arguments that Trump himself used against the Obama deal, and want to avoid that scenario. Here's where I think, however, they may be making it worse for themselves. The longer you wait, the more the debate and the conversation about the deal will be about what Trump may or may not give. Whereas if you actually swallow that cost and make a deal right now, you can go on the offensive and you can change the conversation to what you got in the deal rather than what you gave. But as you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, all the conversation is going to be, oh my God, is it going to be cash loads of money going to the Iranians, and plenty of time to fill the air space on mainstream media, repeating all of those different things that happened under the Obama administration. So in my view, if you want to avoid that conversation, strike a deal and take advantage of whatever you're gaining in that deal and go on the offense to sell that deal instead of defending things that you may not even have agreed to, and you don't even have a deal to begin with.
Well, Trita, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask one more question, which is that, again, it's kind of crazy. Now it's been 102 days since February 28th, when in a lot of ways the world was changed forever, and when this war began. And there's, almost constant ceasefire violations. Lebanon is being devastated, and diplomacy, as you outlined, keeps stalling. So what does an actual off-ramp look like? I know you said that it's important for them to take the deal, but we know there's also, significant U.S. military assets that have been deployed to the region, similar to what we saw in Venezuela ahead of the attack on Nicolas Maduro. So what does an off-ramp actually look like, especially in terms of the military attacks, and who has the leverage to actually make that happen right now?
Look, at this point, there is no other game in town than this diplomacy. And if it was up to me, I would have structured it a little bit differently, not have an MEU, another 30 or 60 days of talks. I would try to get as much done as possible right away. But now they're stuck in this situation. I really do not see any other pathway. Part of the reason why this process has not died, despite all of the attacks, explosions, and escalation that has taken place, is precisely because A, there is no other game in town, and B, both sides really, really need a deal. Trump absolutely needs a deal. This was a disaster. He should never have started it, and he needs to get out of it as soon as possible, as soon as early as away from the midterms as possible. The Iranians need sanctions relief. They needed it before this war. They have $300 billion of damages now. They have problems because some food is not coming in because the US is stopping ships going into Iran. It's not just about ships leaving the Persian Gulf, it's also going to Iran. So both sides really need a deal. And that's why, despite all of these different things that have happened, all of the escalation, this process is not yet dead yet.
Well, Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. God, let this war be over soon, because we're all exhausted,
Yes.
but also so people can stop dying, and so the price of everything can go down. Also, just want to remind our audience, Trita has a fantastic Substack, tritaparsi.substack.com. Fantastic regular updates and analysis there. Trita, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.